About what was said or clarifications? Yes.
I can see how these insights that you explained from John apply to inner peace and to peace between individuals or small groups, but how do you see it working out or contributing to peace between nations, peace on the world stage?
Okay. The question was, and I'm going to repeat it, you can see how this talk about inner peace makes sense, but how do you apply this to the world, and to peace between nations? Well, that's a tough question. The way I say it is I would borrow from the idea of Plato there, that peace starts in the order of the soul, okay? And then the order of the soul is brought to bear on the order of the polis, or the city. So John Donne's thinking is really, he's very interested in peace for the polis, for the city. His first book, The City of the Gods. His first effort to pass over to both our personal and corporate answers to the problems of death. So that he's dealing with the problem of war for the city as well as the problem of personal immortality. Okay, he does both in his writing. And so what you do to start with, that's why I gave you a copy of the book of James. Because in the book of James, there's a section, James chapter 4, about where do wars and conflicts come among you. And for the book of James, the writer of the book of James is saying war comes about because of this problem with desire. So all you have to do is magnify the problem of desire, and you see the beginnings of war. That's how I would begin the answer. But as we get into the 6 next talks, we're going to look at people who had direct impact on war and peace situations. Gandhi will be our next one on Wednesday. And a lot of people see Gandhi as a spiritual leader. And that's how they peg him. But actually, Gandhi was a lawyer in South Africa who pondered how to solve a problem of injustice without hurting physically his opponents. So he engaged in what he called experiments with truth. Now, so what we're going to see is we're going to see that Gandhi is going to fill out the question that has been raised here about the relationship between this inner peace and outer peace, okay? And then the next person we're going to meet next Monday is Saint Pope John the 23rd. And we're going to find out some surprising things about how he helped solve the Cuban Missile Crisis, which has been dug out of history. And in some cases, it's been kind of buried. People don't want to face this. They don't want to acknowledge the role that Saint Pope John the 23rd had in negotiating that crisis. Because there are people who profit, unfortunately, off not telling that story. But we will tell that story here, because we're free to tell it. And it's true. It's a true story. It's not a myth. But you see, you take a spiritual leader like Pope John the 23rd, and he solves a temporal problem, the relationship between Kennedy and Khrushchev. And you take a person who really had to learn spirituality in his own realm, Gandhi, and he had to apply what he learned to solve a political problem. Okay? And that's as far as I'm going to go with Gandhi and Saint Pope John the 23rd, but then the next talk will be on St. Pope John Paul II, and then we'll continue on. But what I hope is the talks will build on each other to answer that question. Okay? Good question. Great question. Any other questions or problems with what I said? And I want to hear problems with what I said too, or any clarifications you need on John Dunne's thinking. Because this is indecent. Any other? Yes.
One more. What would be the best book to start with if you're not very familiar with John Dunne?
You know, actually, the book I lead people, there's two books that I generally recommend by John Dunne to start. One is it's the lectures he gave at Oxford. The King of England was there. He gave these lectures, and he's supposed to have the lectures all printed out, but he gave them from his notes because he's informal. He's from Texas. It's kind of funny. He gets this high honor at Oxford to give these lectures, and he takes them, just whips his notes out and gives the lectures. But they're called Reasons of the Heart. And Pat here brought the copy of the book so I can show you. This book, Reasons of the Heart. This is a turning point book for John, and this is where he really starts to turn toward the kindling and the illumining of his heart and mind in the journey to love God. And he, as always, he's confronting the incredible unbelief of our times. So he starts this book by saying, there's two ways to look at God. We can go by the common notion of God, or we can hear about God from the friends of God. And he says, I choose to hear about God from the friends of God. And then he goes on the journey. Some of my friends don't like this book. They find it too, it weaves in and out, it gets a little abstract. And that's okay, because I got another book for them. And that would be, I don't have it here with me, but that would be the autobiography that John wrote. If I might tell a personal story that's kind of funny about Martin's Supermarket. John was in Martin's Supermarket. One of my friends who does theology encountered him and said, John, I want to write a book about your work. And I want to call it The Gospel According to the Lone Pilgrim, John Dunne's Journey with God in Time. And John turned around, I don't know where exactly, they were in the Martins on Ironwood there, the big one there. I always imagined this was in the produce department where good fruit was sold, right? But wherever they were in Martins, John turned to my friend and said, don't call me the lone pilgrim. Call me the lonely pilgrim. And so that title got settled. But what happened is, as soon as John heard that somebody was going to try to summarize his ideas, he sat down and wrote his own autobiography. And that would be the book that I'd recommend to people who don't want to plow through the problems of unbelief in our age and the Gospel of John, which is what this book is about. This book is incredibly powerful. I know 2 priests who became priests by reading this book. I also gave this book to a guy who was in the Ku Klux Klan. He was up in Door County. And he was searching. He was an older man, searching. And I presented him with Reasons of the Heart. And he said, I had these dreams based on this book. I said, what? My mother appeared to me in the dream and said, the light is the truth, and the truth is the way, And he said, this guy writing this book, he says, is he for real? I said, John Dunne is very much for real, I said. And this guy really turned to the Lord from reading this book. So I know of 2 priests who are priests today because of John Donne's Reasons of the Heart. I also know about that story of the Ku Klux Klan guy who turned to Jesus at the end of his life because of John Dunne. Okay? I really appreciate that, John. But the other book is more accessible, and it's to a lot of people, and I would start with the autobiography. It's called A Journey with God in Time. He borrowed part of the title from my friend. And he wrote the book that my friend was going to write ahead of him. He beat my friend to the writing of it because he wanted to place his writings in the context of his own journey. Okay? Those are the 2 books I'd recommend to start. If you're interested in certain topics, then you can sort out his other 18 books according to topics. If you're interested in contemplation, I would read Love's Mind. If you're interested in, if you're interested in the problem of autobiography, you read A Search for God in Time and Memory. If you're interested in the problem of death, the solution to the problem of death, and the history of that, you read The City of the Gods. Okay? If you're interested in peace, you want to read his book, The Peace of the Present. Okay? But in other words, he covers a lot of different ones. But those are the two. The 2 I'd start with are this one and The Journey with God in Time. Thank you, Pat. Now, any other questions? Those are good questions. Any other problems with this? This is... Any other questions?
I have one.
Good.
But you may have gone over it, so
no, it's okay.
Don't answer if you did.
It needs to be emphasized again.
So you were talking at one point about sort of your approach to people and suspending judgment, and your own judgment. Right. Right. And looking at things from other people's standpoint, and then having a sympathetic understanding of that person. So, which makes it in order to, and then coming back to your own understanding, right? So
right.
So that you're. My question is, how do you, so sort of on a personal level, which then becomes the more communal level, when you're suspending judgment and you're trying and having a conversation with people who have profound differences with you, which is, my guess is that that's where peace has to come in, right?
Right.
Is where, but how does John Dunne recommend that you do that without just trying to find commonality, without saying, well, actually at core we agree, when at core you disagree? Does that question make any sense?
Yeah.
How are you respectful of another point of view, open to another point of view, when your point of view is
so different?
It's so different, and you're not looking for agreement. You're looking for understanding, and that's what suspending your judgment. I'm not placing my own ideas on them. I'm actually open to theirs, which is radically different than my own.
Right. Okay. I'm going to reframe it in terms of what I'm open to is not any standpoint or even some of a person's standpoints. The whole way I connect everything. What I'm open to is deeper than that. I'm open to that person as inexhaustible mystery. So I listen to the standpoints very, very carefully. But what I'm hearing is the things I can know that go beyond the telling. There's mercy being exchanged in that passing over. It's not just a dialogue. That's why a friend of mine refers to this passing over process as dialogue on steroids. Because what we're doing here is we're not just setting up how our standpoints differ. We're coming into a sympathy, not with the standpoints necessarily, but with the person underneath the standpoints who is inexhaustible mystery. Does that begin to answer the question? In other words, I'm not just resolving the difference. I'm coming to mercy in the giving and the receiving. Is that, I need more help. Is it maybe another question?
Would you say with that then, that John Dunne isn't particularly interested in any specific argument, but instead with the exploration of the heart of the other and the mercy that's involved with the exchange?
Yes, I think that that's safe to say. He's not interested in winning a theological debate or an argument. What he's interested in doing is deepening wisdom, which is love and knowledge working together, right? Knowledge taking things in, and love going out to people, right? And so I think that's exactly right. Now, when he starts to layer the insights on top of each other, he comes to very clear wisdom on a lot of things. Christianity, I mean, he's fully Christian. I mean, he's fully confessing Jesus as God, for example. His Christology, in the words of John Powers, who used to walk around Berkeley and say to John, lower your Christology, because your Christology is too high. And it's kind of a funny story. I always laughed at that story. This other theologian saying, you believe in everything about Jesus being Lord. Is the way a simple Christian would say it, like me. But he does in such a way. He's not trying to win an argument. He's trying to deepen the light of the mystery. See, is that just like you said? I think you're on to that as a method. Maybe there's some more clarification here. This is tough.
Yeah, and one thing I always say when people ask me questions is that look at what he does with Islam. So he passes over to Islam, and there he is. He's passed over. He's suspended his Christianity. He's friendly with Islam. And what does he find? He finds that the Bedouin world in which he grew up was ruled by faith. And the four faiths in life, I forget what they are, but Dunne talks about them. And then anyway, he really dwells on this and he begins, now I see why they came up with a religion where you had this merciful God, very distant but merciful, but the rule is whatever happens, and whatever happens is God's will. Why? Because everything's fated. So he has that, he still has passed over. So then he kind of comes back to his own situation. Okay, I'm a Christian. I used to think that Islam was just this religion where they terrible violence but now I'm seeing these are people who are trying to handle the problem of faith, which everybody's got that problem, but Bedouins have it in spades because it's a very, very difficult life in Arab culture. But this is all stuff that I'm taking right from Dunne's own discussion, by the way. This is how he resolved it. So he came back enriched because he appreciated the issue of faith in the lives of people of this religion, but he's still a Christian, except he's a Christian that not only knows a little bit more about Islam, but knows a little bit more about faith. So that's how knowledge is increased in using this example. The knowledge that's increased is, and this was true with me too, well, how can you do such and such with Islam and Christianity? There's no mix in them. You pass over and you find out, no, there is making them, including this big thing about how the Bedouin world is a very, very fatalistic world, and so it created, not surprisingly, a religion that was a religion of kismet, destiny, fate, and whatever. I just gave a little blurb on how you might interpret a certain. Pass over and come back to a certain thing.
Right.
Now he passes over to not individual there. He passes over to a whole religion. You can pass over, and you can pass over. You know what I mean? But
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
I hope that helps a little bit. But that really is quite a, it's a
Gus
powerful
and I have
method.
been thinking about this stuff for about 1,000 years, by the way, so we Gus is waiting for me to flip the switch on, I think,
Is
on
the
that
story,
particular.
is the story of his Passover to Islam, because that happens to be one of particular interest of mine.
Oh, yeah, there's loads of people.
Is that one that's covered in?
Yes, The Way of All the
Way of All the
Earth
Earth.
would be the book by him
Which is-
on passing over to
By the way,
other
John was
religions.
very puzzled as to why they gave him that award as one of the 100 greatest books of the century.
100 greatest spiritual books of the century was The Way of All the Earth.
And he said, why did they give it to Reason to the Heart or something like that? No, they did, because the thing about Islam, in fact, all of the Eastern religions and whatnot, that's a big issue in normal life even. So that's why they gave it to him. It does solve a problem.
Yeah.
With Buddhism too. It goes Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and then a little bit of Christianity. Combining them in a way which people are very happy with, by the way.
Right. No, I meant
like that book.
I meant intellectuals. Like I met a guy at Rosary College when my daughter was looking for schools, and I said, "What do you teach?" He says, "I teach comparative religion." And I said, "So, have you heard of John Dunne?" He said to me, "Oh yeah, I use his book."
Yeah.
His book, The Way of All the Earth, is the basis for 1/3 of my class. See? So yeah, no, he really did master that part of the problem. Yeah.
The Greeks even had a struggle with fate. If you look at Oedipus, the story of Oedipus,
Right.
he was sort of fated to do certain things in his life. They tried as hard as anything to avoid it, and he ended up doing it anyway.
Right. The idea of being trapped in fate, and of course, John doesn't see it that way, of course, because he's Christian. I mean, he does. I mean, for John, there was another insight that was really helpful to struggling with bad things that happen to us. And I just heard it before this talk, so I'm going to share it. Right? For John, God is in the relationship to the things of life, rather than just the things of life.
God is not in the things of life. He's in our relationship to the things of life. That's the exact quote.
Okay, there you go. I mean, I trust that he's here with the exact quotes. That's why you're a theologian and I'm not. But you see that...
But can I ask a question? What does that, God is not in the things of life?
Okay.
God is in a relationship to the
Let me
things
tell
of
you
life.
the story.
That's a...
Comes from maybe through your
In other words,
relating to them?
yeah, the way to relate to the things of life is in the Spirit. And God is the Spirit. And He relates, what is the Spirit? The Spirit relates through knowing and loving. Through the kindling of the heart in loving, and through the illumining of the mind in knowing.
Sure.
So let's say you have a situation I was talking to Gus about before. My nephew, one of the daughters, 5-year-old girl, just got, not just, but a year ago, got terminal, or they thought it was going to be terminal cancer. Terrible situation in their family because this was very tragic. Then another one of their kids became autistic, and the whole family was just falling apart. It was just everybody was, oh, what's going to happen? I hope that Joe doesn't lose his faith, and oh, this is a terrible thing for a family to have to go through. And they got through it. So he bumped into me a couple of days ago. I hadn't talked to him in 2 or 3 years, and I said, whatever happened with that? He said, oh, Uncle Joe, you told me something, and that got me through the whole trouble. You said, Joe, his name's Joe. Joe, God's not in the things of life, in the dying, the rising, the economy, and the planting. Things of life just means the ordinary course of life. God's not in those things. He's in our relationship to the things of life. So how you relate to this great tragedy, that's going to make the difference with you. Not kind of get locked into why God, why God. Okay. So that's an example of what we were talking about. Does that make sense? Yeah.
That's at least part of it. The other part of it, he gets this relationship between the things of life and our relationship to the things of life from the serenity prayer. So, if you parse out the serenity prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So he parses that out, and he says, so there's the things, and in the serenity prayer, and then there's the relationship to the things, the serenity, the courage, and the wisdom. That's the relationship. That's how he does it in one of his lectures. I mean, does that help a little bit to see?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to go on a long discussion of it, but I have a question about that, the things having I don't see how there can be any peace, or even why would one even want to have a relationship with the things if the things themselves, if God did not live in those things? Why do we care about the earth if the earth is not imbued with the Spirit of God? Why do we care? Why do I care about you as a thing?
But you don't. I hope you don't care about me as a thing.
Well,
I hope you care about me as a center of inexhaustible mystery.
Right.
You see the difference?
Well,
you're not objectifying. Yeah.
But what I would say is that's exactly what I'm saying, is that is that you are a thing of life. God lives in you, and you are a thing of life, just as, and there are all things of life.
Right.
And so my relationship to you, I find God in my relationship to you, but my relationship to you, you're only worth relating to. The earth is only worth relating to insofar as they are imbued with the spirit of, with God's Spirit.
Okay. Here, go ahead.
Things of life are not, people are not things like, people are their own end. The things of the life, bonum pugile, right? The bonum, how do you pronounce it? Bonum pugile? Useful good, as opposed to bonum monastum, which is the transcendent good. People are not, well, they're not useful goods. What Gus is saying is what John Dunne would say. You're objectifying a person if you say that they're a thing. But what the thing is, we're drifting off of context here. I'm not sure. What's it called? The thing.
Yeah, no, I
can't confuse people.
Right, you don't want to use this.
It's confusing.
I understand that you don't want to use. John Dunne is very, very accessible to the whole problem of environmentalism and the whole problem of that. But he's not neglecting that. But what he's saying is what Joe just said. A person can never be just a usable good. A person is a transcendent, and as that, persons don't come under the heading of things in that way.
And when he's talking
about the things of life, he's talking about
things of life, like to everything there is a season. That's what he means by thing. And then the Capella lists all the different things that he's talking about.
Right.
The time to be this, the time to plant. That's what he means by things.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
Can I make a suggested paraphrase, and I could be off, but this will maybe help clarify. If there were plants at the table here, we're out of the room, not here. Those plants are beautiful on their own. They are creations of God. But they become a source of energy. That's what I consider them in a way. And a source of a relationship with God as you come into the room. And you relate, you see, and you are entranced by the beauty of that plant or that person, that source of mystery. So perhaps the energy of God, the switch is turned on when you're there to engage with it.
That's close to what Dunne's saying.
Yes.
But he doesn't talk about the switch being blown on. He talks about enkindling and illumining. That's what he means. God enters into, my nephew's daughter died of cancer, she didn't die, but she was going to die, they thought. And the autistic kid. Those being things that it's one thing to relate to them in a bad way, but another thing, you redeem them when you relate to them in a good way. And you're right, asking God to come into the situation is like throwing on a switch, and all of a sudden you see and you feel different.
Okay, does that help? Thank you very much. See, you see how these things get worked out in an encounter? That's exactly the point. Thank you. That's very helpful. Question?
I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make sense, but I'll try. Somehow this ties into this idea of journey, the quest, the time we walk alone, and our heart's desire, and everyone's heart desire is unique. You have your unique, we each have a unique relationship with God. That's why comparison is really a bad thing, is because we each have our own relationship with God. So there's that, and then the journey together, the friends along the way. I've got a prayer that talks about God of blessing, alone and together. You know, there's two journeys. And I can see both of this in some of his thinking. You know, when we journey together, when we pass over to understand someone else, we're trying to understand their journey. And in some ways, you know, then you bring in the theology, the body of Christ.
Right.
You know, and we're part of a body. So in some respects, my desire is mine with God. But then there's that, you and I are one. You know, Father and I are one. You and I are one. There's a oneness somewhere in there.
Well, the way he resolves it in one of his later books, is he talks about the emergence of the individual followed by the reunion at the end. And we're at the far point of this circle. We're out here, the lonely individual completely emerged as a being. But the hope is for reunion with God and with other people. There's always the danger that the person in that fully emerged state, this is what he says in one of his books, will go back to the tribal, and only identify with the tribe. And we emerged from the tribal into the more lonely position. And the lonely position pushes us toward reunion with God and with other people, rather than back to the tribal. But there's always this temptation to go back to the tribal. I think that's one point that Dunne makes that might help with that. I mean, it's not the only one, but that's the one I thought about when you shared. That there's this danger. Loneliness can lead me to become a lone wolf. Or I can find the love at the core of that longing in my loneliness that pushes me toward God and other people. You see? Does that, I mean, that's John. That's where, is that, I mean, I don't know if that helps you or not, but that's my effort.
Well, I don't really have a problem with so much. I just think it's very fascinating. But there are these two things, our experience with God that is unique, our lonely pilgrimage, and yet it isn't.
Right. Isn't that something?
It isn't.
It isn't.
You know, we are a body.
Absolutely.
So we're all connected.
We're all connected.
We're all connected.
A common humanity. Absolutely. And we're going to see more of that, I'd say, especially in John the 23rd. You're going to see the common humanity coming out in the whole story of his journey and what he taught. So you know, I mean, the peace things are meant to cut. The witnesses will build on each other. Yeah.
I sometimes thought of this image. People in heaven are like jewels suffused with the light of God. And each jewel is unique. It reflects God in a different way. And it's like they're just radiating God. They're totally themselves, they're totally unique, but they are fulfilled, they're perfect, and they're showing God's radiance in a unique way. And each person is like a different jewel, but all the jewels together reflect God. start collecting a lot of different jewels. They're all beautiful. They all reflect the light in a different way.
That's a sign. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll see you, hopefully, you've got the schedule the next time. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.